In today's video, I talked to David. David is 61 years old and desperately wants to retire. He has a little bit over $500,000 in his portfolio, and he's asking if he has enough to step away to avoid the dreaded commute and begin focusing on what he wants to do. Also concerned about sequence of return risk, in today's video, we show David what he needs to do to ensure that he can retire today, as well as what he can do to avoid that sequence of return risk. Joining me on today's retirement makeover is David. David, welcome.
Hello. Hey, James.
Nice to see you. And today we're going to be talking about you and your retirement goals. Do you mind sharing before we get started, though? What are you doing for work today?
Yes, I am basically a 61-year-old plant biologist getting paid to be a chemist.
Plant
So,
biologist paid to be a chemist. What does that mean?
yes, it basically means I've been involved with plants my entire life, starting with growing them in the greenhouse, then growing them in the laboratory, and now analyzing them.
Okay. How much longer do you see yourself doing this, and when are you thinking retirement's going to come?
I'm hoping retirement comes within the next month or two. I feel the most stressful part of the position I have now is the long commute every day on the Schuylkill Expressway across Philadelphia.
What are we talking in terms of time for this commute?
We're talking about a very early time waking up, trying to get on the road by 5 a.m., making it there by 6 a.m. That's the easy part. It's getting home that's difficult. If it's any later than 3 p.m., it takes at least 90 minutes to 2 hours. So it's
Gosh,
a
okay.
long time in the car. Yes,
So long time in the car. So you're looking to essentially break away from the commute, maybe even more so than the work, it sounds like. Um,
absolutely.
as you're thinking about that, retirement ideally as soon as possible, what are the worries in your mind as you think about being able to retire?
Well, the first worry I don't have any longer because about a year ago when I said this to a friend, he said, well, David, what are you going to do? And that was the question mark because the money is one issue. But if I didn't have a real, I'm a scheduler, I am a planner, I need a plan for each week. So I think I have that part of retirement, at least for the first year or two, pretty much spelled out. But regarding the financial end, I want to live a long, healthy life. I want to be a nice, active person for many, many, many years. And I'd like to make sure that my minimal assets, I don't have millions and millions of dollars, but that those dollars last for at least as long as I'm going to be here.
Very good. Out of curiosity, you've planned out the first 1 to 2 years. What do you have on the agenda?
Well, I think we're going to keep tutoring. I'm a good tutor. I do most of my tutoring remotely. And I'd like to be able to spend some time with my older sister who lives up in New Hampshire. And I'd like to get more involved in the community. I usually have to limit my community involvement to the weekends, but I'd like to be able to help some people in need during the week as well.
Yeah.
So those are, and then honestly, for personal enrichment, I want to learn the piano. I've never, when I was an undergrad, I had to take one music theory course and I learned a little bit of piano, but I'd like to really learn piano.
Yeah.
And
Well, I got to
that's kind of a
imagine
goal.
beautiful with a 3+ hour commute a day, 15+ hours a week combined with a full-time job. I got to imagine there's very little time to actually do some of those things. And so you're in the position of, can I retire ideally as soon as possible so that I can learn the piano, continue tutoring, be more involved in the community. But at the same time, I need to make sure that my assets are in a position that you're 61, so Social Security is not kicked in yet. I need to bridge that gap. Do I
Yes.
have enough? What could this look like? And I'm sure there's just some questions swirling around that we'll get to today about, can you do this first and foremost? And then secondly, what can you do to optimize it?
Yes. That sounds great.
Perfect. So if you were just to say, if you could boil down, sure, there's a handful of concerns, some of which you listed. Is there one thing that's top of mind of, this is my biggest fear about retirement with the financial side?
Well, the biggest fear, I think, is one that we all share. None of us can tell the future. And the sequence of return, if you look at people that retired, let's say 2008,
Yep.
after a couple of bad years, if those happen to be my first few years, that makes a big difference in how long my monies are going to last.
Yeah.
That happens at the end of my retirement, it's not quite as big. But I've seen, the spreadsheet, what happens if there's 2 or 3 in a row that are bad years, how that significantly affects retirement. So sequence of returns would be the first thing. Absolutely.
Perfect. Let's start there as we do this. Let's go to your plan and your profile, David. I'm going to share my screen here, and we'll
Great.
start to take a look at everything here. So what we're looking at is an overview of your net worth, whether it's money in the bank that you have here, but mostly I want to focus on investment. So you have various investment accounts. Some of them are individual taxable accounts. Some of these are 401k plans. Some of these are Roth IRAs, traditional IRAs, but about 530,000 or so split between traditional pre-tax accounts, Roth, so investments you've already paid taxes on, and then brokerage accounts. So you have that there. You own your home, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Very good. I think one of the concerns is property taxes are fairly high where you are. Is that right?
Absolutely. What I'm thankful for, unless if they change that in New Jersey, they cap your property taxes at age 65. So right now it's about $5,000 a year. Let's say that goes up to 5,500. They would cap that at age 65.
Cap that 65. Very good. And do you see yourself living in this home indefinitely, or at any point do you see a major change with that?
Absolutely. They're going to have to take me out feet first.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So
I love my townhome. I don't need a bigger home, and I don't want to downsize. It's a beautiful home, right 2 miles from just about everything except where I work.
Lovely. Except where you work. Yeah. The big thing that we're looking to see, when can we wrap that up here? So very good. You have the property and mortgage free, correct? No mortgage on the property?
Absolutely. It's been about a year.
Very good. Congratulations. So property taxes, yes. Insurance, yes, but no mortgage payment at this time. So this is a snapshot of the assets you have. And this is essentially the tools, the resources you have to create the retirement that you want to look at. Let's start with goals. So for goals here, we're solving for, David, can you do this today? Essentially, can you make this happen today? Because if the answer is no, then we can start extending this out and test what if it's 3 more months, 6 more months, 12 more months. But let's start with an assumption that we end this call and you go turn in your notice at work and you're done as an initial starting point. Retirement expenses. So these expenses, this isn't property taxes. This isn't your insurance on your home. This isn't taxes. This is just, what does David need to cover the basics? Food, utilities, transportation. On this budget, David, one, how confident are you in these numbers? And two, do you feel as if there's things that you aren't able to do on this amount?
Yes, I'm very confident in those numbers. I think the actual number is $2,083, but that's literally with no wiggle room. That's with absolutely no, buying Christmas presents, doing, anything other than the bare minimums. That's the bare minimums. Yeah, they did. What I did is I actually went in and charted groceries over the last 3 months to the dollar, and I saw, wow, they've gone up considerably in the last 9 months. Yeah, absolutely.
So you're going to survive on this, but you're not going to be able to maybe do some of the things or be with some of the people that you would like to be able to spend more time with, going back to your goals for retirement, if this was it.
Precisely. Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to come back to this. I think this is a good way to run this, is you start by running projections of, can I retire and survive? If so, can we start adding to that retirement budget to see, what does it need to look like to more than just survive, but to thrive, to be able to do some really fun things? So I like the way that we're starting with this. And then annual healthcare costs. Have you projected out what this will cost? Pre-Medicare, we're looking at a number of $3,000 per year. Post-Medicare, $3,500 per year.
And I haven't really done that. I think when I was on the phone with Lucas, I think we came up with that as kind of like a bare minimum. I'm hoping it's less than that. I don't know if I'm being realistic, but I'm thinking if my level of income starting in 2025 is very low, I should qualify for a good amount of subsidies.
I believe so too. And I know you mentioned you have an individual that you've spoken with. We can certainly connect you with a group if not. But I agree that I think it's likely that you'll have a pretty significant subsidy that you're eligible for that would help to keep insurance costs low, which by default helps to keep overall costs low, which would be great.
And James, the other thing related to that, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the one reason I was saying, well, we'll tap one of the taxable retirement IRA accounts is because I need to have enough income that I'm above the Medicaid level, that if you're
Correct.
below the Medicaid level, you no longer get the subsidies. Obviously, you don't qualify for Medicaid because you have assets, but you don't get the subsidies.
Correct. We want to be
Right.
high enough to avoid Medicaid, but low enough to get the subsidy. And you're exactly right. So there is a little bit of a game to play there, but it's fairly straightforward. And any good insurance team should be able to help coordinate with you or your advisor on what should that number be to both minimize taxes while simultaneously remaining eligible for the subsidy.
Wonderful.
I have added this here, David. This is what if we wanted to add another budget line item, not forever, but maybe for the first
Right.
10 years of retirement to say, hey, from 61 to 71, what if we add in another amount for travel, for family time, for something? So that was me somewhat taking liberties ahead of this call to add that in. I'm going to start with it at 0. So it's not skewing your retirement budget, saying let's just look at the bare bones first, and then we can start to play around with that.
That sounds great.
Long-term care as well. We have this. I've zeroed this out just to say, okay, let's put this as a potential expense, and we'll be able to toggle some levers to see what if this number's higher, to see how this would impact things. But to start, let's just look at, do you have enough to make this work? The thing that we'll be looking at is, what income sources do you have to meet all this? You, of course, have your investments, about 530,000 or so between investments that will generate income. But what non-portfolio income sources do you have? And as of now, your Social Security benefit at 65 would be around $2,700 per month.
That's correct.
65, that's the number I think maybe you intended to collect at. Is there significance to that, or is that just what you felt would be a good, healthy time to collect?
Well, I know there's two ways to look at this. You can use Social Security and take it at 62 and bridge to even touching your assets, or you can do it the other way around and start tapping your assets and then take Social Security at age 70, the maximum age. I kind of thought, well, what if we're in the middle? So I'm not at full retirement age of 67. I'm a little bit early, but I think because in some of the previous positions I had, I brought in a little bit more income. I have a pretty good Social Security monthly payment.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a great place to start. There are some pros and cons, especially when we're considering things like sequence of return risk, and we can illustrate how that might work here to help make a good decision. And also keep in mind, your Social Security decision, you should have a good idea at this point when you think you're going to collect it, but it also needs to be part of a more dynamic strategy that, based upon how things go in the market or with spending or other factors, there may be good reason to collect it earlier than you anticipated or potentially later than you anticipated. And we'll come back to that. Great. I see you modeled this out here of, what if we pull $25,000 from IRAs from the time of year one of retirement. So 2025 would be the first full year until 65. To your point, this was you just saying, let's ensure that we're pulling enough out to get enough taxable income or adjusted gross income, modified adjusted gross income, to avoid Medicaid. So I see that there. And then you'll have a pension. So pension, is this the annual amount, $1,200? Is that correct?
Well, no, I think Lucas might have actually calculated it. I'll have the effect of a quadro. So I have the lump sum and the single life or 10-year certain amounts, and that can either be collected at 62, 63, or 65.
Yep.
So I think what we did is, if you look, it's roughly a $35,000. At 65, it would be a $35,000 lump sum, or about 200 and something per month.
Yep. I see that right here. I'm looking in this 1230. So at age 65, I'm going to round this to closer to 24. It's probably 24 and change, but it's going to be, let's assume.
Now you have to cut that in half, though.
Take that in half.
Yeah, because it's a quadro. So I'm going to lose half. So I think the 1230 is probably good.
That's the half amount of that. Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Now that counts as taxable income, correct? So is it better to take the lump sum? Is it better to take the annuity? I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the best idea is.
Let's come back to that, because there's a few different ways we can look at that, whether it's from an investment perspective, tax perspective, flexibility perspective. But I'm going to come back to that to see if that's okay with you.
And James, I don't want to complicate it too much, but when you look at going back to the IRA and taking out 25 per year, maybe it's a good idea to put guardrails around that. I mean, if you have a bad year where the market loses 10%, maybe then you only take out 20,000 or 15,000.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the best way is to do that. And then do you take it out as one big sum at the beginning of the year, or is it better to take it out kind of like a paycheck?
Yep. Hey, all great questions. Let's turn our attention there right now. So with these details in mind, what we know is we know, what do you want to be able to do, at least baseline? What is it going to cost for David to survive in retirement? So we're going to assume you retire today. You live on a little over $2,000 per month. And we know what you have in investments and income. And what we're going to see is, can you do this? And the way that we see, can you do this, is we just model out the different investments and the cash flows that you have. So if we start with income, you have salary, but this is a prorated salary through August of 2024. And then you have nothing. And then you're going to have nothing for 2025, 2026, 2027. And by the way, when I mean nothing from outside income sources. I don't mean
Correct.
nothing in general, because you will be living on your portfolio. And at that point, here's the amounts of income that you might have. Social Security, you see the first year is lower because you don't turn 65 on January 1st. So it's going to be a prorated amount. And then you receive, here's the full amount, full age 65 amount, adjusted for inflation a little bit each year. Pension here, and then here's the total income that you'll have at this time. Okay. What we want to do is we want to take that total income. And by the way, here's those plan distributions. Plan distributions meaning you're going to take this $25,000 intentionally without necessarily solving for how much is needed from the portfolio. But here's the $25,000 you're planning to take from your IRA to say, here's a total income we can expect between those sources. Salary this year, IRA distributions for the next 4 years of $25,000, pension and Social Security beyond that. We then need to compare that to say, if that's the income coming in, how far is that going to go in terms of covering the desired lifestyle? And by desired lifestyle, it's truly not desired lifestyle as much as bare bones lifestyle to start, and then we'll back into desired. But what does that look like? Well, a little over $2,000 per month means about $25,700 per year. That's going to increase with inflation, of course. On top of that, your mortgage is paid off. That doesn't mean property taxes go away. That doesn't mean insurance goes away. One of the things that's not modeled out here, is not a perfect way to do it in this tool, is you said New Jersey caps property taxes at 65. So this is a bit conservative. And then it's assuming that those property tax rates do continue. So full disclosure, this is over projecting expenses just even by a bit here. Healthcare. So if we're looking at health insurance costs, both when you have a projected subsidy the first year. And again, another disclosure, interesting thing I want to point out is this is likely a number that will need to be updated when working with a health insurance professional to actually determine what will the true amount be once you determine premiums there. But we're projecting that separately. So as we start to look at all that, here are your core expenses that we'll need to cover, that you'll need to cover each year throughout retirement. And the question is, do we have enough to cover them? I'm no longer going to have a salary. I'm fully relying upon pension, Social Security, and investments. And what we can calculate here is, if we go to, let's call it the first full year of retirement, the $25,000 you're already planning to take from your IRA. Well, your total expenses, or the total outflows required, are $37,200, which means there's an additional $12,000 or so that you'll need to take from an account. Brokerage account, IRA, Roth IRA, doesn't matter what, but from an account to supplement the $25,000 you're already planning to take from your IRA to meet this number, so you can pay taxes, pay for healthcare, pay for housing, and then have the equivalent of $2,083 per month in today's dollars left over.
Well, James, right now, just to let you know, I have about a little bit over $80,000 in cash, either in CDs or high interest savings. So that's probably where that money would have to come from.
Agreed. And so that's where withdrawal strategy and tax strategy is really intertwined, is let's take some from the IRA, one, to fill up maybe some of those lower tax brackets, but two, just to create enough income to avoid Medicaid. And by the way, it could be an IRA withdrawal. It could be a Roth IRA, or Roth conversion. Do you convert this from an IRA to a Roth IRA, which both gets that money growing tax-free and increases your modified adjusted gross income to get you to those thresholds, and then potentially take this remaining amount from your brokerage or your cash accounts? So
Oh, I
Just,
didn't even think
just
about
as a
that.
thought.
That sounds like a great idea.
So those are some of the things that we'd want to take a look at as we go through. But to me, first things first is the lifeblood of your retirement is, can I do this? Which is, do these cash flows work out? And then we go to the tax strategy, the investment strategy, everything else to optimize this. But what we want to know is, can we afford, can our portfolio that we have, can David's portfolio that he has, can it afford these net flows, not just today, not just next year, not just the following year, but years into retirement? And specifically to your concern about sequence of returns, can your portfolio sustain this even if you retire tomorrow and we have a horrible 2025 and another really bad 2026, and it really doesn't get better for some period of time? That's the unknown, and that's what we want to solve for. Any
Okay.
questions so far before we continue?
No, this sounds great. I'm following right along.
Here's one way in which we want to do that is we really need to understand, what do these withdrawal rates represent as a percentage of your portfolio? If you look at withdrawal rates, there's no perfect science, unfortunately, to saying, David, here's exactly how much you can take out of your portfolio. There's the 4% rule that's saying, hey, based on back tested data, what's the most you could take out without having to worry about market environments, using historical conditions as a, but it's not perfect because it can't predict the future. There's a guidance guardrails approach where it says, hey, take out this amount, but apply guardrails. So all of these are places to start. And so what we want to do is say, okay, the first full year of retirement, how much would you be taking from your portfolio? You're projected to take 5.4 to 5.6 per year from your portfolio. Now, I look at that and say, okay, David, if you are starting with that portfolio amount and you are going to maintain that level of withdrawal forever, it's probably on the upper end, the upper threshold of what we'd be comfortable with. And there's fairly good likelihood that at some point you would need to take a cut or freeze your spending or do something else, even just temporarily, to be okay. The reason I think there's a relatively small likelihood of that happening is just because this withdrawal rate doesn't last forever.
Right.
This is saying, Dave, you can put more pressure on your portfolio in those first few years, and then pension kicks in, and then Social Security kicks in. And once those things kick in, your withdrawal rate drops dramatically. It drops to, in fact, 1%.
Right.
An incredibly sustainable amount over time. Now, it does increase here at age 75 to a little bit over 2. That's not because all of a sudden you decide to start traveling a bunch more, spending a bunch more. It's just because required distributions kick in, forcing you to up your
Oh,
withdrawal rate.
okay.
But even then, you're at a healthy withdrawal amount. So I'm going to talk about implications of sequence of return risk in just a second, but does that make sense so far?
Yes. I'd never seen this screen. I've been on the software, but this is great that it actually calculates this. Because when I saw that we're up at almost 6%, I'm like, that's way too high. I'm not a risky person. I do believe that I want to be as active during the go-go years, but I don't want to be in the back of my head, oh, I think I'm spending too much money. I think I'm spending too much.
Yeah.
So it's great that that's only for the first few years. Then we get some relief from Social Security kicking in.
Yep. Yes. And now here's a few things to think about around this, because this is where the planning comes into play. You mentioned sequence of return risk. If the stock market only had great years the rest of your life, there's no risk at all of this. If you're growing by 8, 9, 10% in your stock investments, nothing to be afraid of. The fear, what we do need to be afraid of, is what if we're not growing by 10%? What if we're actually losing 10% year one and year two and year three? And now, in addition to taking out 5%, the market's down 10%. So that's a 15% cumulative drawdown. And then in the next year, and the next year, and you start digging yourself a hole that, if you're not careful, can be very difficult to dig yourself out of.
Absolutely.
The fear is bad years, but I want to reframe that a little bit. It's not necessarily just a bad stock market, not bad years that we have to be mindful of. It's the entirety of our investment portfolio performing poorly that we need to be concerned about, which may sound like one and the same, but let's assume that you had a portfolio that was, I'm just gonna keep it super simple, 70% growth stocks, 30% super conservative short-term bonds. Well, if there's a really bad down year in the market, the 70% of your portfolio might be down 20, 30, 40%. But those high quality short-term bonds, and I'm being very intentional to say short-term bonds, because we saw even in 2022, the aggregate bond market was down pretty significantly, down double digits. But if you're owning shorter term bonds that aren't as subject to interest rate risk, aren't as subject to credit risk because they're high quality, those, in most cases, it's no guarantee that it's always, but in most cases, if the stock market's dropping, those are going to increase a little bit, or at least stay relatively stable. If you have something in your portfolio like that, this doesn't need to concern you so much, because yes, your portfolio as a whole might be down 20% as a blended return, but don't look at the portfolio as a whole. Look at each asset within the portfolio and say, okay, this is the year I'm going to pull from that 30% that's in conservative reserves. And so as long as you avoid having to sell the thing that's been hit really hard, sequence of return risk isn't quite as risky. Where it does come into play, where it is risky, is when you have a high withdrawal rate and high concentration, because you're being forced to take high amounts out of one single asset, and you don't have the flexibility of saying, oh, I'll just draw from the thing that's gone up in value this year if you're overly concentrated. Does that make sense?
So being able to do that, then maybe I have the majority of the IRAs in a targeted fund, which mixes the stocks and bonds on its own. So if I were to have to take distributions from that fund, I'd be selling stocks and bonds at the same time.
Correct.
So would it be better to have things maybe separated into a stock fund and a bond fund separately?
In a perfect world, that's the way I recommend it. Target date funds can be good. There's a few downsides. One is they tend to get maybe more conservative too early in some cases. Some is it's not really intentional and unique to your specific goals. But that's another downside is, it might be the perfect allocation of stocks and bonds, but you lose the control, you lose the flexibility to say, hey, don't sell the stock portion of my portfolio when I request a redemption, just sell the bond portion. So by separating that out, this becomes more important in retirement than it was in your working years, just because now you are actually starting to spend the money in the actual investments you sell to free up that cash is really important.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Let's go back to this now. So we talked about the fact that, hey, David, you're in a great position to be able to do this. Your probability of success is very high. This isn't necessarily a successful financial plan, though, because this financial plan doesn't really get you to where you want to go. This allows you to survive, but you want to do more than survive. You want to be involved in your community. You want to travel to see family. You want to be able to go see your sons, to be able to buy gifts, to be able to do things that certainly couldn't be done on the numbers that we're looking at so far. So high probability of success does not equal successful financial plan if the ultimate goals that we have aren't really being met here. So what I want to do is there a number that comes to mind when I said, let's imagine you do buy the gifts you want to buy, you're able to travel to see the people you want to see, you're able to take the trips. Is there a dollar amount, either on an annual basis or monthly basis, that you feel would allow you to do all those things?
I would say probably, well, you were saying for the first 10 years, because I could see maybe taking 2 or 3 trips in that 10 years. I wouldn't be traveling every year, but if we were to say 2 to 3 trips, let's just say that's $10,000 on its own. And then if you add another $1,000, so let's say $20,000 over 10 years.
$20,000 per year?
Over 10 years. No. So that would be $2,000 per year.
2,000 per, okay. So the 2,000 covers like gifts, being able to travel and see people. The 10,000 covers extra trips that you're talking about.
I'm saying the trips part would be 10,000 over 10 years. So that would be 1,000 per year.
I see.
Yeah, and then another 1,000 per year at the most for gifts.
Okay.
2,000 a year would be enough, more than enough.
So 2,000 a year, that's a little over 1,500 a month. If I just rounded this up to 23, I'm adding more like 2,500 per year to this.
Okay.
This is saying this isn't even just doing this for 10 years. This is what if I add this to your baseline budget that is in place until the end of your plan. In other words, until you pass away, you're spending an extra $2,500 per year by increasing your budget here. Mm-hmm. If I rerun your plan, you're going to have a few less dollars at age 90 when we're projecting you to pass. Obviously, that's just an unknown, but you have to model out something. It really doesn't make a dent in your probability of success. Or in other words, you could still spend more, which doesn't surprise me, because $2,000 per year, that's that comes out to a very small percentage of your portfolio as a whole. That's
Mm-hmm.
less than 0.5% of your portfolio as a whole. So it's really not even making that significant of a dent in your overall spending. That being said, is that enough? Is an extra couple $1,000s per year enough? Or is there a different amount that would make you feel even a little bit more comfortable, even as we're just illustrating different concepts here?
I can't say I've never lived beyond my means because probably when I was your age, I made some bad decisions. I used to have a credit card balance, but I don't live beyond my means. So I don't see, I really, maybe a little bit higher, but I don't see ever living an extravagant lifestyle. And now, the other way, there's that one, I am going to be reading a book called, I think it's called Spend Till the End or something like that, which kind of has the other approach, basically not leaving a lot of assets on the table when you expire.
Is it
So,
die with zero, maybe?
yeah, something like that. Yes.
Yeah.
So I mean, I can see both ends. I don't ever see living an opulent lifestyle. That's
Okay.
not me.
Well,
No.
what I want to solve for then isn't so much, there's two ways to approach spending. One is, what do I want to spend to live a great life? And that's, I think, of more like a bottom up approach, the micro approach of starting with you uniquely. The other end is, what could my portfolio and my resources support on the high end? It's not
Yes.
unique to me and my actual spending. It's just, what's the ceiling of that? That's just trial and error. You plug in numbers here. What does it look like if I bump this up to 2,800 a month? So that's what, 40% more, almost 40% more than what we initially started with. You are seeing some more significant changes to your
Mm-hmm.
desired ending portfolio. I don't want to say desired ending portfolio balance, just your ending portfolio balance. One of the things that is skewing this is after years and years and years of inflation. So if I look at this in today's dollars, just to back out the impact of inflation, it's saying, okay, David, instead of passing with 1.1 million, you might pass with 644,000,
Right.
which is still more than your portfolio balance today. So in other words, you've lived all this. And again, this isn't a prediction because this is based on assumptions. This is just modeling
Yes.
it out. That's probably fairly sustainable. Probability of success, it's lower, but I'll go back to, don't confuse this with a sign of a successful financial plan. To me, this is a whole lot more successful if it means you can travel more, give more, be involved more than this is, which probably means you can talk to people on the phone, but you can't travel to go see them because there's not room in your
Right.
budget to be able to afford it.
Absolutely.
So as we look at this, one thing I would ask is, how important is it for you to have $1.1 million in your liquid portfolio at the age of 90, in addition to the value of your home at that point?
Absolutely not important at all. Not at all. I have two sons. They're pretty much self-sufficient. If I had a little bit of assets to give to them, like my home when I pass, that would be great. But that's not a big deal to me at all. No.
Yeah. So this is one of those interesting points of very few people say, yes, this is really important for me to have 7 figures in my portfolio when I die. But at the same time, it's hard to bring ourselves to know, hey, I'm a frugal person. I've lived within my means. It's hard. The reality is, if you don't spend it, it's very likely you are going to have a larger portfolio upon passing than you go into retirement with, assuming these spending numbers that we're talking about come out to play. So it's, which is the preference? Spend more than you're comfortable with, do more than you're comfortable with today in a responsible manner, or reach age 90 and say, wow, I've got some stuff left over that maybe I wish I had taken more trips or had splurged a little bit more on certain things. Something to think about as you're looking at this, of how do we use this to work backwards into, how do I live a life that I don't end up having regrets about what I didn't do because of financial reasons along the way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Any questions on this? I want to tie this back into sequence of return risk in a second.
No, that sounds great.
Here, I'm going to go back to something that's maybe more in line. I'm splitting the difference. If 2,800s, it's not even a magic number of the high end, but it strikes me as a very sustainable amount. If just over 2,000 is what you started with as the bare bones survival budget, let's call it $2,400 per month, just to somewhere in the middle. At $2,400 per month, I now want to go to withdrawal rates. And let's see, this might not actually show. It does. Okay. What that does is, it means, David, your withdrawal rates are now higher than they were before, which makes sense because our portfolio, we're spending even more of it to spend $2,400 per month as compared to only spending just over $2,000 per month. Here's where the Social Security decision comes in. And here's what I mean by that decision should be dynamic. If you're in a position where the market is doing incredibly well, in the next 3 years, 4 years before you turn 65, the market's just doing awesome. There's some real benefits to pushing Social Security back in your specific position because New Jersey doesn't tax it. So it's tax-free at the state level. There's some federal tax benefits for it. One of your questions that you asked prior to this was, does it make sense to purchase a single premium immediate annuity just to lock in some more guaranteed income? Social Security is like an annuity. It's the same thing. It's a guaranteed income source, obviously, assuming the benefits don't change, which you could make the argument of how much do you want to fully depend upon that. But if you've got a great market, you might say, hey, what does this look like if I change Social Security to age 70? And I don't want to look so much at what does it do to the probability of success as much as what that does mean is you're taking a lot more from your portfolio these first several years, but then nothing because Social Security is covering everything until required distributions force you to take it. These are not sustainable rates if the market's not performing well and if you're going to take them for long periods of time, which is why I say part of this strategy is tracking what the market's doing. Because if on the flip side, we have a horrible down market and you're spending more than you thought and you don't feel comfortable with those withdrawal rates, and you say, you know what, does it make sense to collect Social Security early? Well, if you collect it as early as possible, now all of a sudden your withdrawal rate, it never exceeds 4.1%. So it's kind of a way to mitigate sequence of return risk if needed. It's like a tool you have in your back pocket to say, one, optimize your investment allocation to ensure there's enough in conservative assets to meet those needs those years, regardless of what the stock market's doing. But two, your Social Security strategy comes into play here of, if needed, it's a lever you can pull to either turn on income sooner to alleviate the pressure on your portfolio, or it's a lever you can pull in the opposite direction to push it back, which has tax benefits, income benefits. And while you're doing that, the market's been good. So your portfolio can keep supporting another year and another year and another year of higher than average distributions.
So it has to be a dynamic. It has to be dynamic. You have to look at what's happening in the market. If the market has a downturn, that's going to affect things considerably. If the market's doing really well, maybe we'll wait a little bit till the full retirement age or later.
Right. Exactly. But I think that first things first, and looking at your plan, David, and I want to be very cautious when I say this, because this is all contingent upon these numbers being accurate. But if this is truly the survival budget, and this is truly what it costs for health insurance, which can be confirmed with a health insurance professional, and if you're getting the growth rate that we're projecting, which by the way is about 6.5% or so on the investments that you have, which again, there's no guarantee that happens, but that's lower than the long-term growth rate of the investment mix that you have. If those things happen, I don't see why you couldn't walk away from work today.
That's great.
If expenses are much higher, if you do end up spending much more, if there is something, that's where we'd want to model some things out to say, what changes do you need to make, whether it's saving more, working longer, cutting in other areas. But I think you're in a good position to make that happen if this data is correct.
James, that's wonderful news. Absolutely.
Any questions on any of this?
No, you've made it very straightforward. And I guess this software, so to come up with those percentages, it does the Monte Carlo type thing where it goes through many different scenarios, right? And that's how it comes up with that percentage of success.
This percentage of success, to get technical, is based upon what's the return profile of all the assets in your portfolio and what's the standard deviation. Meaning the higher the standard deviation, the more that the return of that specific investment is going to fluctuate around its average. And so what it's saying is, based upon these returns and these standard deviations, if we model thousands of scenarios with a 1 standard deviation event, 2 standard deviation event, 3 standard deviation event, what's the probability of what percentage of the time is David successful in this? And just a side note there, 9%, that's probably higher than most people want, saying, hey, I don't want a 9% chance of failing. What the software is not taking into account is, okay, David's a reasonable guy. In years when the market's down 40%, maybe he's not taking that extra trip. David's a reasonable guy. In years where this is happening, maybe he makes some other change to his plan. So it's not modeling in those tweaks and adjustments over the next 30 years because there's just so many potential outcomes for that, which is why 91% for in most cases is a very acceptable probability of success for most people.
Well, thank you for explaining that. That's great.
Yes. Well, David, really appreciate you coming on. Thanks for being part of the retirement makeover, and we'll wrap there. But congratulate. I'm excited to know that this is more than just, hey, you can do it. It's no more need to sit in traffic for dozens of hours a month and time to begin doing some of those other more fun things. So thank you very much, David, for coming on.
Thank you, James. Thanks a lot.
Root Financial has not provided any compensation for and has not influenced the content of any testimonials and endorsements shown. Any testimonials and endorsements shown have been shared with each individual's permission, and are not necessarily representative of the experience of other clients. To our knowledge, no other conflicts of interest exist regarding these testimonials and endorsements. Once again, I'm James Knoll, founder of Root Financial, and if you're interested in seeing how we help our clients at Root Financial get the most out of life with their money, be sure to visit us at www.rootfinancialpartners.com.